Hey everybody, have you missed me? Did you expect me to come back on tonight? At some point tonight you probably said to yourself, I'll bet that Scott Adams guy is going to be back on Periscope pretty soon. Thank God, yes. Somebody said, thank God. Well, once we get 1,000 people, and it looks like that's going to happen pretty quickly, I wanted to help you, as well as the press, translate from Trump speak into the common language. So the common language is what the people speak, most places in the country. But there are places, and New York is one of them, where sometimes people speak in more hyperbolic terms. And some of those people who speak in hyperbolic terms speak in more hyperbolic terms than even the people who speak in hyperbolic terms. So it can be hard to translate what they mean if you don't speak Trump speak. So I thought I'd give you a small lesson today. So we'll start up here with genius, all right? Now, if a regular person says genius, they might mean Albert Einstein, for example. But in Trump speak, genius means I am mentally fit for the job for which you elected me. Now, what you'll notice here is that the quick way to translate is that this one is much more. It's more than this one. And once you start getting the hang of it, you can translate some of these on your own, but I'll get you started, okay? Let's do another one. So from the quote in the Wall Street Journal today, President Trump said he was speaking about North Korea and its wedge strategy to put a wedge between South Korea and the United States. And he said that he had seen more wedges than anyone alive. All right. Now, using the same formula, where that Trump speak is more than the common language, you can engineer backwards to get to what he meant, which is that he's an experienced negotiator. Okay? So, just recapping, Trump speak, I'm a genius. That's the big form, and how you can translate it backwards. You reduce it back to the common language, that he's mentally fit for the job. And then here, if he says, as he did today, about his negotiating skill and his ability to recognize a wedge strategy in negotiating, he said he's seen more wedges than anyone alive. That's the big form. Reduce it to an experienced negotiator. So that's how you would understand that. If you didn't speak Trump speak, you can just sort of reduce the words. Then a more recent addition to the vocabulary. This was introduced to us today. In Trump speak, there are things called shithole countries. Shithole countries. Now this is, if you've understood the pattern so far, this is the big form, the hyperbolic form. So in order to understand what that means, you probably want to put it in context of what the meeting was about, and then shrink it down, all right? And then that would shrink down to a far less hyperbolic statement once you've adjusted it from Trump speak into the common language. It really meant poor countries with bad schools that have favored immigration status. All right? So Trump speak shithole countries, but translation in the common language, poor countries with bad schools that have favored immigration status, and he wondered why. Was it offensive? It was really offensive. And I don't approve. I'm going to add, I disavow. So I'm disapproving because this was indeed, all kidding aside, very offensive. But if you understood what it meant, it will offend you less. Now, from earlier, we had the controversy about the, quote, clean DACA bill. In Trump speak, a clean DACA bill means a simple phase one deal, including the wall, of course, because he always talks about the wall. So those are just a few lessons for today on Trump speak. I think we all agree that whether you're a supporter or not a supporter of the president, that the phrase shithole countries, no matter how much you laughed, and I know some of you did, don't deny it, but let's also agree that it's offensive, right? Especially when you see it taken out of context. Now, it gets doubly offensive if you're watching this on CNN or MSNBC, and they leave out a little bit of context. Part of the context was especially when he said, why can't we get more from Norway? The context that they're leaving out more often than not, they do mention it, but they leave it out more often than not, is this. Can you see it? Well, that's the headline that Trump has just been spending time with the Prime Minister of Norway. So what is the first country that comes to your mind when you're spending a bunch of time with the Prime Minister of Norway talking Norway stuff? Norway, 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 all afternoon. Norway, Norway, Norway. Let's talk about Norway. How's Norway? There's the Prime Minister of Norway. How about Norway? How about Norway? 3 hours later, he goes to think of a country that's prosperous, because that's a good example of the type of country that he thinks will fit his filter. What's he say? Norway. Does it sound racist? It definitely does. Is it offensive? Even if he didn't mean it that way, it's definitely offensive. Definitely. It's really offensive. But if you look at it in context, you have to ask yourself, most of the news is reporting today, and I think you would agree, that the forum in which he said this was public enough that he had to assume that the word would get out. In other words, he was not speaking privately. He was speaking in a big enough, wide enough forum that it was fair to assume that anything said in that room could get out and probably would get out if it were something interesting. So here's the interesting thing. Tomorrow, the press is going to ask him to clarify, what did he mean by shithole countries? And you will be very entertained all day because CNN will run the word shithole on its screen all day long. And it's, I'm sorry, I'm still a 12-year-old at heart. I can't look at the screen without laughing every time I see shithole on CNN screen. I can't help it. I'm not proud. I'm not saying you should laugh. I'm not proud of it, but I'm telling you, every time I see shithole on the screen, I do laugh. Again, I'm ashamed of myself. But here's the thing. Tomorrow they're going to ask President Trump, wherever they capture him, what he meant by shithole countries. Now, if they believe that he really did consider these countries shithole countries for racial reasons, then, and they believe he said it in a public forum, why wouldn't he say it again? If he meant what CNN is reporting, he meant to say, I want fewer black and brown people, and they believe that he said such a thing in public, when they ask him to say it again in public, why wouldn't he say it? He said it once in public. If they believe that he is so brazen as to think that and promote it and say it in public, why won't he say it tomorrow? I'd like to make a prediction. he will not he will not go he will not be saying that that's what he meant. Tomorrow you're going to hear that he was talking about the small cluster of countries that they're in the same cluster of conversation because they had favored status because their economies had been so badly destroyed. So they are countries that by their nature and for the reason that they got grouped together for the discussion that we're talking about is because they have bad infrastructure, which would include education systems, etc. So he'll explain it that way. And then forever CNN will say, but, why Norway? And then he'll say, you reported me talking to the Norwegian Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Norway all day long. You reported it all day long. I was with Norway. Norway. How would I not think of that one first? And it's a good example of a country with a good education system, so they would have skills. Now, the real question that people want to ask is the merit-based immigration system racist? Because what the president, I think, was asking in this meeting when he used the unfortunate phrase shithole countries is that that was not a merit-based system, and especially if it favored countries with bad educational systems, like literally gave them an advantage in immigration, that would be the opposite of what he had promoted and has been saying all along, that he wanted a merit-based system as opposed to a we're being nice to you system. Now, it's a perfectly fair argument that we should not have a merit-based system. I think a serious person can make that argument, but you can't argue that it's good for the country. What's good for the country is to bring in the people who will be the most additive to the economy right away. You've probably seen already, there's some video of the president saying that, talking about Indian students who come to this country and study in our colleges, and why can't we keep them here? Because we'd like to have their skills. So he's on record recently, 2016, saying he wants more brown people, that's my word, not his, wants more Indians who have come here to go to college because they are, by definition, college-educated people with skills. So I'm watching CNN hosts tonight, and by the way, you have to watch CNN tonight. No disrespect to Fox News, but if you want to be entertained tonight, you have to watch CNN. It's really interesting because their world seems to have bifurcated off, and they're on a different movie. In their movie, the president literally said something effectively identical to "we want fewer brown people." In the movie of his supporters, he just supported a merit-based immigration system, which is consistent with what he's been saying forever. He just did it with offensive language, which I won't defend, but it's not that far off from the type of hyperbole he uses all the time. And when you hear it in context, which is not being reported, it does sound different than if you hear it outside of context. All right, so this will be the headlines for a while. I have to say, I was getting this close to raising slightly the president's report card for for basically race relations, because I had him at an F. It was his lowest grade. And I was going to say, it's feeling like a D minus, maybe a D. I was thinking about maybe I should just bump that up because it seemed like things had been going well lately in a number of fields. I think he's going to be signing something for Martin Luther King Day tomorrow. It just seems like things were starting to, nudge in the right direction. But this puts him back to an F for race relations. But curiously, it may not hurt him for immigration. So if you're weighing, certainly immigration probably didn't get any worse for him, but race relations still at an F. We're hoping he can raise that grade. All right, that's it for today. Don't be too freaked out tomorrow. People are going to be going nuts about his comment, but wait until they just ask him to clarify. All right, if it's true what they're reporting on CNN, that he said an overt racist thing in public in a way that would suggest he's not ashamed of it, just ask him to clarify. And tomorrow, when he tells you that's not at all what he meant, and that he's just being consistent with his call for a merit-based system, which is no surprise, see if you feel the same tomorrow. So for those of you who just went, oh my God, my head is going to explode, he came out of the closet as full racist, which, by the way, was exactly what Business Insider just reported. Business Insider said he basically came, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, that he just came out of the closet as a racist, and he's decided to reveal himself to the world. And it does feel like that, the way it's being reported today. But just wait until they ask him, and then he doesn't reinforce their story. And you're going to feel a little bit different about it tomorrow. Still a huge mistake. If anybody saw this and said, well, Scott, you're defending him again, let me be as clear as possible. This was an error. This was not a clever signal to the base that he planned to bind himself to him. There was nothing advantageous about this. There's no hidden upside to this whatsoever. And I hope I've been consistent in saying that President Trump is what I call a pricey president, meaning that you're going to get a lot of good stuff, the economy, fighting ISIS. I don't need to list them again. You're going to get some good stuff, but it's not going to be free. Unfortunately, we didn't have a choice of the candidate who gave us all the good stuff that enough of the voters wanted without a cost. So that wasn't one of our choices. So right now our biggest challenge, I think, and I think the media has to take a little bit of responsibility for this, maybe 30%. I would say the media is at least 30% responsible for a worsening of race relations, because just look at the way CNN is covering this event. Every time they fail to mention that Norway was mentioned because he just got done meeting with Norway and it was on his mind, every time they fail to mention that, just be aware that they're not reporting the news anymore. All right, then they're reporting a preference. They're reporting an interpretation. They're reporting that they can read his mind. All right. So I just watched Erin Burnett come very close to say she could read his mind and see these evil thoughts, based on his actions. All right, that's enough for now. Go back to whatever you were doing. I'm hoping I don't need to get back on Periscope tonight. I'll see you tomorrow.